Hello and welcome to News Centre. I'm Parikshit. Luthra. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says India will soon establish its own Big Four accounting firms. Speaking at the sidelines of an event in Switzerland, Goyal said that the government was on track to creating large domestic accountancy firms in India. He added that India will soon have firms that emulate the hiring capacity of the Big Four firms that employ over 3 lakh people in India. Last week, the Prime Minister's office held a meeting with select domestic audit firms. Currently, Deloitte, PwC, EY and KPMG constitute the Big Four firms. Indian partners operate all of the Big Four firms in India and own all domestic capital in these firms. The firms require Indian affiliates to conduct audit operations in India. Revenue from these operations are less than 10% of the total revenue. A majority of the firms' incomes are from consulting, advisory, transaction and tax-related work. These firms control 10% of the market share in the auditing space. Exports from the Big Four in India are 1% of India's total exports. Listen in to the minister's comments in Switzerland first.
So the Deloittes and Ernst & Youngs of the world have understood this. Each of these Big Four is hiring 100,000 people in India, 120,000 people. Now we are trying to create our own Big Four. Earlier the rules were very funny, we couldn't have mergers of all the CA firms, and our mindset was also different. Now gradually people are understanding. We'll have our Big Four in India very soon. Wait and watch.
To take this discussion forward, we are now joined by Dinesh Kanabar, CEO at Dhruva Advisors, Vishesh Chandok, CEO Thornton, Bharat. Also on the show with us is Ajay, Bahl, co-founder and managing partner, AZB and Partners. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Dinesh Kanabar, if I can begin with you, could you give us a sense of why there is a need for India to have its own version of the Big Four? It is being said that we want to reduce dependency on these foreign consulting firms, auditing firms. But why is there a need now, according to you?
So before that, just a quick background to help understand the response to that question. If you look at, Parikshit, what's happening today, and you rightly mentioned that audit today constitutes a very small portion of the practice of the Big Four. It's between 8 and 15% depending on which of the Big Four you are looking at. Tax is another anywhere between 18 and 22%, and a lot of it is consulting business. And if you look at this business, tax and consulting are largely unregulated business. Tax is to some extent regulated, but largely unregulated. It's only the audit profession which is regulated and is therefore covered by the prescription of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So when the Honorable Commerce Minister was speaking about the need for firms to realign themselves, think in terms of large sizes, that applies largely to the audit practice, because insofar as the consulting and the tax practice is concerned, you can do whatever you want to do without any regulatory framework, and you can set up whatever you need to do. What has happened over a period of time, Parikshit, is that if you look at the Big Four, because they are global giants and because they have built a brand for themselves, and rightly so, it's been decades and decades of brand building, quality, etc. They today get preference when it comes to government assignments and whatever else. Whereas the Indian firms really do not have that size and do not have that capability. In fact, to an extent, if I may tell you, the large consulting assignments which the Big Four today vie for, and which is what they are looking forward to executing in India, their competitors are not domestic firms, but their competitors are really the IT firms. So the Big Four would compete with the TCS, NNHCL, Wipro, and whoever else for the assignments that they are looking for. So that's a scenario that we are looking at. And it's just important that Indian firms make a mark of their own, become global organizations, and therefore are perceived in a proper light, the way the Big Four are perceived globally. And through that extent, I would very much subscribe to what the government thought process is, that Indian firms need to grow in size and make a global mark.
All right. Vishesh, just to get you in on this point, the narrative and the aim and explanation for this exercise to have India's own Big Four firms, an alternative to these Big Fours, is that we need to be less dependent. We need to be diversified. We need to have our own companies and make sure there is not dependency on 4 or 5 consulting firms. How do you see this argument and the manner in which the deliberations are now taking place?
No, so Parikshit, I entirely agree with Dinesh Bhai and with your narrative at the beginning of this, including what Minister Goyal said. I think, first of all, delighted that this matter is back on the agenda. 7 years ago, the Prime Minister talked about the vision, and now finally the Prime Minister's office has taken it square on and is driving it. So absolutely delighted. The second point is the why, the question you asked. The why is, and let me give you an example of other regulated businesses. Dinesh Bhai just said it's about the regulated business in tax and consulting. There's largely nothing stopping creating any sorts of firms like Dinesh Bhai's created, but it's the regulated business. Other regulated industries, if you look at, like banking, just imagine a world where there were 4 or 5 multinational banks and everybody else was a regional rural bank or a cooperative bank. There was nothing in the middle. All the big Indian banks, the HDFCs, ICICIs, Kotaks, did not exist. Look at the credit rating world, another world which is regulated. We are almost in that position. All the big credit rating agencies are part of and owned by an international organization. And I think that's why in the regulated business of audit, for an economy that wants to be the 3rd largest economy in the world, the window of opportunity is closing. India ought to ensure that it has its own institutions which will stand up for its own capital in 10, 15, 20 years versus only multinational firms. And I must add here, this is not about stopping any big 4 or anybody else. It is about enabling the whole ecosystem. There are, very often this is looked at, how can we stop the current big 4 in order to promote others? I think there needs to be a level playing field. It's about promoting all the 100 firms in India which are part of some global network, because the regulated audit business is always done through a network. Nobody can set up a global audit firm because you need local partners in every country. So it'll always be a network. 100 top Indian audit firms are already part of networks. It's about finding ways to enable them. And whenever you want, we can talk about what is stopping that today.
Right. I'll come to that in just a bit. Ajay Bahl of AZB is also joining us. Ajay, if we look at the big audit firms, all of them have Indian partners. The capital of these firms is owned by Indian partners. One explanation that some of the big 4 companies have often given us, big 4 audit firms have given us, that we are major exporters of services from India, and exports constitute almost 1% of India's total export basket as far as exports from these big 4 firms are concerned. Keeping all of this in mind, do you feel there is a case for having domestic audit firms, large domestic audit firms?
First of all, I think there's a misnomer to call them global accounting firms. As you rightly said, they are Indian accounting firms. It's an Indian accounting firm which has access to know-how, access to technology, access to systems. And it's all owned by Indian partners. I've dealt with them for years. I have not seen foreigners floating around in their offices or corridors. So as Vishesh said, this is not about making somebody small to make somebody else big. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the statistics, today there are only 12 firms in India, 12 accounting firms. This is the Institute's own statistics, 12 accounting firms in India which have 50 or more partners. For a profession which is so old, you've got to ask yourself the question, what is exactly holding that back? Is it the big 4? Is it the big 6? Is it the big 10? Obviously not. There are only 20 firms which have between 26 and 50 partners. So the issue of creating a big firm, a domestic firm, has to be linked to consolidation. You can't become big overnight. You can. I mean, look what Dhruva has achieved by, what has been done by themselves in their space. They've done a fantastic job, but not everybody can do what Dinesh has done. There are other firms who've done it. But first of all, you've got to look at consolidation as a reality. Where is the effort being made to promote the concept of aggregation of firms? We have rules for names which prohibit you from using names which are not the names of partners or erstwhile partners. If you have 2 firms which have got 4 distinct letters, if they combine, they're going to have a name with 8 letters in it. You can't promote yourself. You can't promote your brand. So how the issue has to be looked at from the perspective of what is stopping smaller firms from consolidating. And let me just share with you some of the perspectives of each of these firms. I know some of these from the time we were starting our careers. I remember Price Waterhouse used to have one small office in Himalaya House. There were maybe 20 people. BSR, when they started, at about 15 or 16 people in India. They've all grown by people joining and agreeing that creating a large institution and not having your name on it is a better way to grow, to have higher quality of work, and achieve your objectives. So these firms have also grown in India. Nobody's sitting outside and just basically making them grow. They have grown in India.
Okay.
So I think this is the
All
whole.
right. Let me also.
This global big four, to my mind, is just a complete misnomer. And two of them don't even have a foreign name, including Vishesh's firm doesn't even enjoy. The accounting firm carries the name of his grandfather. And BSR and SR Bartley Boyd don't even have the name as an example.
All right. So let me also get in Rakesh Nangia, founder and managing partner, Nangia and Company. Mr. Nangia, what are some of the changes that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India will have to make? Recently, there was a committee for aggregation of CA firms that was set up. There was a revised guidelines for mergers of CA firms that were issued for strategic mergers. There were guidelines that were issued, draft guidelines for regulated pathways for networking and collaboration that were also issued. Are we on the path to having aggregation in the audit space among the CA firms in India?
I think, good evening, my friends. I think just to answer your question is this clearly demonstrates that the government is moving towards consolidation. Government is looking forward, basically, and not looking inward. In fact, these steps taken recently even by the institute, even by the government, in my personal opinion, is a landmark decision and making it forward for actually having big accounting firms in India. And I'll give you a very good classical example. Take the case of China, actually. China has humongously big non-big four firms. Yes, there have been some regulatory things which are in the favor of the firms, actually. Same type to see Korea. Korea has humongously big CA firms, audit firms. And I think this current voice which is happening, this movement happening, this meetings taking place, changes bringing in the regulations, being aware of the situation. Yes, there are more firms required rather than the entire audit business being by the few handful of companies actually. And I add another classical example which happened 2 years back when the government opened the BFSI sector for the non-big fours. Where they put up a ceiling, sorry, I'm correcting that, where they put up a ceiling actually, and see how good it went off. This exercise came out to be extremely productive, extremely fruitful, and so many good firms came up and filled up this gap, and they have done extremely well. The survey, the response from the client has been extremely, extremely good actually. This is a stage to demonstrate the government should move to the next level now, basically, beyond BFSI, bringing such regulations.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. And there seems to be efforts in that direction. In fact, let me get in Dinesh Kanabar on that. I'll come to Vishesh immediately. Dinesh Kanabar, we've seen and we've reported on meetings being held at the highest level. In fact, there was a meeting at the Prime Minister's office also to review preparations. Sanjeev Sanyal also made a presentation there. Could you give us a sense of how things are moving in terms of the government setting the groundwork for having its own big domestic audit firms?
So from what I understand, Parikshit, and I have no inside knowledge about it, is that a committee of secretaries is being set up to evolve a framework. And this committee of secretaries is thereafter going to hold deliberations with professionals, with industry bodies, with everybody, to come back to say that what changes in the current framework, whether it is in the institute's regulations, whether it is in terms of government's own preferential pricing norms or whatever else, does the government need to do so as to promote local talent from aggregating and creating large Indian firms. So it's going to be an effort which I think will be there over the next few months with deliberations going on. I think there are 2-3 parts to all of this, Parikshit. We all spoke about what the government needs to do. I think the key thing we need to figure, and there was a point which Ajay made, which was so appropriate, that at the end of the day, the Indian affiliates of the global Big Four started small, grew up. I think the key thing is quality, the demonstration of how your brand stands for quality. And therefore, when you sign something, how is it accepted to be a globally acceptable brand which anybody can rely on? That's something which needs to be done. One other comment I would make, Parikshit, is that, in several things, India has leapfrogged because of use of technology. Today, use of technology, artificial intelligence, if this is imbibed by the Indian firms, a lot of things can be done out here. It might be a surprising thing, Parikshit, to know that some of the global audits actually happen from offices in India. So the auditors may be based in a US multinational, US auditors, but a bulk 90% of the work could be done out of India, all verification, everything else, subject to just a review overseas. So we have the talent, we have the technology. The question is the framework, and that's where the government is moving towards.
Right. Yes. So the Committee of Secretaries is now going to look at the framework that is required for having a domestic big audit firm, or multiple firms for that matter. But then there is a question of aggregation. Will these CA family-controlled businesses be able to give up control? Will we be able to encourage mergers in the space as well? We'll come to that in just a bit. We're taking a short break. I'll request all our guests to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are discussing the Indian government's efforts to have deliberations and consensus on building India's big audit firms, alternatives to the Big Four. Now, there are both sides of the story. There are arguments for both sides. One is to reduce dependence on foreign firms, and the other is all these big audit firms that you have in India all of them are actually registered in India, they're run by Indian partners, and the capital is also owned by the Indian entities. Let me go across to Vishesh Chandok at this point. So Vishesh, as Dinesh Kanabar was pointing out, that a committee of secretaries will be formed to set up a framework to look at this entire exercise. But then a point that you raised earlier, these big audit firms have been in India for decades. Why have we not been able to build domestic capacity? One issue, of course, is that 90% of the CA firms are family-owned. What do you think is stopping us all these years from having our own versions of the Big Four?
Thank you, Parikshit. Absolutely, I can comment on that subject squarely. I've seen that evolution of our family firm over the years. I think Dinesh Bhai, as well as Ajay and Mr. Nangia, all touched on very relevant points. There are three things which are stopping Indian firms. Two are not in their hands. One is in their hands. The one that is in their hands is culture and thinking, right? Are they really committing to quality? Are they committing to doing what's right over what's easy? Are they committing to that, prioritizing what's critical, my name or, building an institution, right? What's not in their hands is the demand, first of all. And Ms. Nangia gave the example of China. In China, when the government wanted to create 10 big Chinese firms, it supported those firms with demand for their services. Government contracts, PSU audits were prioritized to be given to those firms. It was very clear we're not trying to create 100 firms, but these 10 firms will get all PSU listings in Hong Kong, each licenses as it was called. So it's a demand problem as much as a supply problem. The supply, that's the chicken and egg. Do you expect the firms to, come together, invest, create supply, but there's no demand because somebody says Big Four only or, Big Five only today? So how do we create the demand for services? The second one, or the third one, if culture was the first one, demand was the second one. The third one is capital. How do we provide investment capital? Because families, partners, etc., do not necessarily have the capital to invest like some of the bigger, Big Five, etc., have. That capital can come from the private equity ecosystem, as is the case in the Western markets today. There are 1 in 2 firms out of the top 30 in the UK which are today private equity owned. Private equity capital is sitting with huge interest to want to come and propel this business, only if regulations allow that. So those are the three things: culture, demand, and capital. 2 things are not in the hands of the Indian firms. We should not blame them. That's where they need government support. The third one, culture, they will fix. I'm absolutely sure there are enough old Indian institutions like you just referenced who will step up if the other 2 enablers were there.
Right. And Ajay, Bahl, coming to you. Now, when you speak about these Big Four audit firms, the reason why almost 326 of the 486 Nifty 500 companies are audited by some of these Big Four is possibly because they have an international name, and international practices require you to go to some of these Big Four companies. How will India be able to generate demand and capital? This is going to be a big question. You can have the laws, the enabling factors to have mergers and acquisition, create those Big Four companies, but then how do you have demand? Will you have to ensure that certain government contracts or certain government audits will only go to the Indian firms? And how will you differentiate between these Big Four firms which are owned by Indian partners and those which are traditionally owned and run by Indian entities?
So first of all, when we talk about dominance, you're looking at the top end of the entities, but actually if you look at PIEs as a whole, public interest entities, we've looked at the number, it's under 25% or 26% of the audits are done by the Big Six, not just the Big Four, under 25%. So 75% of the companies which are either listed or which are PIIs, which are considered to be those which are governed now by NAFRA, are audited by other than the larger firms, number one. Number two, capital is also, at the end of the day, a creation of aggregation. If 3 firms get together and from 30 they become 100, you get common resources, you get a combination of funds, you're able to invest. We have merged our own practices post the merger. Large portion of the growth has been because we have now common facilities. We have bring in better talent. We are able to hire people who believe there's a future beyond the founding partners. So capital is needed, but some degree of economies of scale can only happen if the smaller firms decide to aggregate. So there is nobody stopping them except themselves. And then there is this whole, I'd like to just add to what Vishesh said, but some other points. You see, what is holding them back? One is their own limitation, their willingness to be their own masters rather than be willing to have a conversation around becoming big. I have so many conversations at the Institute. Every time I talk about aggregation, some member will get up and say, but Mr. Well, small is also good. So I said, but I'm not talking about small being bad or good being bad, but we are talking about growing. Number two, we have archaic regulations with respect to advertising. And I give you a classic. Today, who is that impacting? Today, liquor advertising is banned in India, but every liquor company advertises around the globe. So your brands are building, you get their ads on YouTube, you get their ads when you travel overseas. So that brand is being built and the Indian entity, the subsidiaries are getting the benefit of that. Insofar as the larger firms are concerned, they don't advertise in India, but they advertise globally. And that benefit will also be available. Forget the consulting side of it. Who's actually being hurt by all of this? The brand building exercise that is being affected is of the Indian firms who do not have today the ability to even appear. And Rakesh is appearing as Nangia and Company. He'll get a notice from the Institute tomorrow that how have you been appearing with your name of your firm? Technically, he's not supposed to give his name when he appears in a program for the Institute. That's how they look at it. You write an article, you can't say partner of Nangia and Company. So a lot of these archaic limitations have to grow. Number two, technology. And 2005, there is a study group report which said that these network firms are way ahead of us in knowledge and technology. And that is where the future of the profession lies. 25 years later, we are still calling to question those very same network arrangements which give the technology, and we bring in guidelines and we bring in this limitation and that limitation instead of opening it up. Open up the name. An Indian law firm can be set up with Apex, TPEX, whatever they want. You don't allow that for an Indian accounting firm. You don't allow them to brand build. So it's not just about what government should do. I think in the first instance, Institute needs to get real and tell the government we are happy to have these advertising limitations go away. Secondly, the Institute has to make it easier for firms to aggregate. I've looked at these aggregation guidelines. I can have a chat with you on that. They were bizarre. And you have to promote actual growth in size. And China, I have to say, Vishesh, I agree. It wasn't as simple as giving business. They supported those firms even through capital. They trained those people. I've examined the China model very carefully. It's very different. We don't have the China model in India, and we can't. We are a democracy. Okay. We have to let people make their choices of who they want to hire. Somebody wants Dhruva, he wants
time, unfortunately. Yeah. No, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Clearly, there are issues on the table which we'll have to address. One, of course, lifting these advertising limitations, then having some aggregation guidelines as well, and creating demand and the brand India as well. How do you make sure that the brand of these big audit firms that we develop goes abroad and they are able to generate business to themselves as well? Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. That's all we have time for here on News Center. Goodbye.